The barrel of the Glock pressed cold against Imani Whitfield's temple, and the man holding it smelled like expensive cologne and gun oil. "On your knees," he said in accented English. "Hands behind your head." Behind her, the marble floor of the Seoul penthouse stretched 50 feet to floor-to-ceiling windows where the Han River glittered like spilled mercury under the December moon. 6 men in tailored black suits stood in a loose semicircle, their weapons drawn but lowered. They weren't aiming at her. They were aiming at the man kneeling beside her, the man whose blood was pooling across the white marble in a spreading dark mirror, whose hand was still wrapped around hers like he'd refused to let go even as the bullet tore through his shoulder. Jun Ho Seo, her husband of 41 days. "You don't have to do this," Imani heard herself say. Her voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. A black girl from East Baltimore, 28 years old, 3 months ago she'd been crying over $4,200 in medical debt at her mother's kitchen table. Now she was kneeling on a billionaire's floor with a gun to her head, refusing to let go of a Korean Mafia boss's hand. "Look at me," Junho rasped. His dark eyes found hers, and even bleeding out, even surrounded, he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room. "Whatever they offer you, don't take it." The man with the Glock cocked the hammer. "Mrs. Seo," he said, "your husband has 30 seconds to live. We are prepared to be very generous to his widow." Imani closed her eyes. But to understand how Imani Whitfield ended up here, a gun to her temple, a wedding ring on her finger she barely recognized, and a choice that would either free her or bury her, we need to go back. We need to go back to the night a stranger knocked on her door. This story is for every woman who has ever given and given and given until there was nothing left of her own name. Every woman who looked at her bank account on a Tuesday morning and realized she was funding everyone's life but her own. Every woman who has been told she should be grateful for crumbs while she was the one baking the bread. If that's you, settle in, because what happened to Imani Whitfield over 41 days will make you question everything you thought you knew about sacrifice, about love, and about the difference between being chosen and being used. Before we go any further, if you believe a woman's worth was never up for negotiation in the first place, hit that subscribe button and drop the word "mine" in the comments. Let me know you're here. Let me know you're listening. Now, let's go back to a basement apartment in Baltimore 3 months before the gun and meet Imani before she became the woman they couldn't break. The radiator in apartment 3B clanked like it owed somebody money. Imani Whitfield sat at the warped IKEA kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in September, surrounded by the architecture of her own slow drowning. The medical bills from her mother's hip surgery were stacked in a manila folder labeled "Mama" in her own handwriting. The eviction notice from her brother Darnell's landlord was paper-clipped to a sticky note that said $1,800 by Friday, or they put his stuff on the curb. Her cousin Trina had texted her 17 times in the last 6 hours about needing $400 for her son's asthma medication. Imani had $312.84 in her checking account. She was a senior translator at Kessler & Bain, a downtown Baltimore law firm that handled international corporate contracts. Korean to English, English to Korean. She'd taught herself the language at 15 because she'd fallen in love with a Korean drama her best friend Yolanda had loaned her on a scratched DVD, and she'd kept teaching herself for 13 years until she could read legal contracts in 2 languages and sometimes dream in both. She made $74,000 a year. She saw maybe $9,000 of it. The rest had a system. The rest had a route. Her mother's hip, her brother's rent, her cousin's son, her uncle's hospice, her aunt's car payment, her grandmother's headstone. She was still paying off the headstone 2 years after the funeral. Every paycheck Imani got was already gone before it hit her account, claimed by names she loved and obligations she'd never agreed to, but couldn't refuse without becoming, in her family's mouth, that selfish one, that uppity one, the one who forgot where she came from. She hadn't been on a date in 3 years. She hadn't bought new shoes in 2. The lipstick she was wearing was a Maybelline tube she'd had since she got the job, 4 winters ago. Her boyfriend of 2 years, a man named Marquise who managed a Foot Locker in Towson, had left her in May. He'd looked her dead in the face in the parking lot of a cheesecake factory and said, "Imani, you ain't got nothing left for nobody. You a ATM with a heartbeat. I need a woman, not a fundraiser." The cruelest part was that he hadn't been entirely wrong. She closed the manila folder. She opened her laptop. She'd been saving. Secretly. Guiltily. Like a woman hiding contraband. $50 a paycheck in a separate account her family didn't know about. She'd named it Korea in her banking app, and the balance, after 18 months of skimming from her own life, was $1,847. A trip to Seoul. 2 weeks. The dream she'd carried since she was 15 years old and had whispered along to a song she didn't yet understand. She had a plane ticket booked for January 14th. She'd told no one. Not her mother, not Darnell, not Trina. Because she knew with the bone certainty of a woman who has already learned this lesson 7 different ways, that the moment they found out she had $1,847 set aside for herself, an emergency would materialize. A cousin would crash a car. An aunt would need a procedure. Her mother would cry on the phone and say, "Calm, but baby, you know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death." And Imani would close out the Korea account before sunrise. So she lied. She said she was tired. She said she was busy. She let the calls go to voicemail. And every night before bed, she opened the banking app and looked at the 4 numbers like they were a love letter she'd written to a future version of herself. $1,847. 19 weeks until her plane took off. That was the lie she'd been told her whole life, the one she was finally, privately, secretly, terrified, starting to question. That love meant being last in line for your own life, that a good black woman bled for everyone else and called it grace. She turned off the kitchen light. She had no idea that in 73 minutes someone was going to knock on her door, and nothing would ever be the same. The knock came at 12:58 a.m., 3 short raps, then silence. Imani froze in bed. Her apartment was on the basement level of a converted brownstone on East Madison Street, and nobody knocked at almost 1 in the morning unless somebody was dead or somebody was about to be. She grabbed the aluminum baseball bat she kept under her bed, a gift from Darnell, the one useful thing he'd ever given her, and crept to the door. The peephole framed a man she had never seen before in her life. He was Korean, mid-30s, tall, even hunched, a tailored black overcoat that looked like it cost more than her car, wet hair plastered to his forehead from the rain that had started around 11, and he was holding his left side with his right hand, and there was blood seeping through his fingers, dark and steady, dripping onto her welcome mat that said, "Home, sweet home," in faded letters. He looked up at the peephole as if he could feel her watching. "Please," he said in Korean. "I know you understand me. I know who lives here. I have nowhere else." Imani's hand froze on the deadbolt. How did he know she spoke Korean? How did he know where she lived? "Who are you?" she said through the door, in Korean, her voice low. "My name is Junho Seo," he said. 3 weeks ago, my company hired your firm to translate a contract. You translated it. You found a clause buried on page 47 that would have cost me $11 million. You flagged it. You did not have to. The senior partner took the credit, but I read the original markup. The handwriting was yours. Imani's stomach dropped. She remembered the contract. She remembered the clause. She remembered Mr. Kessler patting her on the shoulder in front of the client and saying, "My team caught a real beauty, didn't we?" And she remembered staring at the floor and saying nothing because the bonus he'd given her had paid 2 months of her mother's physical therapy. "You followed me?" she whispered. "I had your name. I had a reason to be grateful. I have spent 3 weeks deciding whether I had the right to ever knock on this door." He coughed, and a fleck of blood hit the mat. "I would not be knocking now if I had any other option. 2 men tried to kill me 40 minutes ago in a parking garage on Calvert Street. They believe I am dead. If I go to a hospital, I will be dead in 12 hours. If I go to my own people right now, I will be dead in 6. I need 8 hours. I need somewhere they cannot find me. And there is no one in this country who connects me to a basement apartment on East Madison. Imani stared at him through the peephole. A rational woman would have called the police. A safe woman would have walked back to bed and pretended she'd dreamed the whole thing. But Imani Whitfield had been rational and safe for 28 years, and rational and safe had given her $312 in her checking account, an ex-boyfriend who'd called her an ATM, and a manila folder labeled Mama on her kitchen table. She thought about the clause she'd flagged on page 47. She thought about the way Mr. Kessler had taken the credit. She thought about the fact that this man, bleeding on her welcome mat, hunted halfway to a corpse, had read her handwriting in the margins and remembered her name. Somebody had finally seen her. She slid the deadbolt. She opened the door. Junho Seo looked up at her with the dark, exhausted eyes of a man who had not expected to be saved by anyone in a long, long time. "Get inside," she said in Korean. "Take off the coat and tell me who is trying to kill you." He took one step across the threshold and collapsed into her arms. By 3 a.m., Imani had stopped the bleeding. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his side, missed the kidney by a margin she didn't want to think about, and exited cleanly. She'd packed both ends with sterile gauze from the CVS first aid kit she'd bought during her mother's recovery, sutured the entrance wound with fishing line and a sewing needle she'd boiled on the stove, and given him 3 of the leftover hydrocodone pills she should have thrown out a year ago. He slept on her couch under her grandmother's quilt. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands and watched the rise and fall of his chest like she was guarding it. When he woke at 6:14 a.m., the first thing he said was, "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would scream." "Tuh." She set down the coffee. "Now, talk." So he talked. His name really was Junho Seo. He was 34 years old. He was the only son of Seo Taemin, the founder of the Daehan Group, a Seoul-based conglomerate with holdings in shipping, pharmaceuticals, and what he called, after a pause, older industries. "You mean organized crime," Imani said. "I mean older industries," he said evenly. "My father built his legitimate empire on a foundation that he is not ashamed of and that I am not pretending does not exist. He is 71. He is dying of pancreatic cancer. He has 6 months, and I am his heir." Imani felt the kitchen tilt. "The 2 men who shot me last night," Junho continued, "were sent by my uncle, my father's younger brother, Seo Taejun. He has spent 30 years running the older industries while my father ran the boardrooms. He believes the entire organization should pass to him on my father's death. My father disagrees. The succession will be decided in a private meeting in Seoul on January 20th. If I am alive on that date, I inherit everything. If I am not, my uncle inherits everything. He has 3 months to make sure I am not." "And the contract?" Imani said slowly. "The clause I flagged. Was a trap my uncle's lawyers planted in a deal he knew I would have to sign. $11 million in liabilities structured to detonate inside our pharmaceutical division and discredit me as my father's choice. You did not just save me money, Imani Whitfield. You saved me my inheritance. You saved me my life." She stared at him. "Why are you telling me all of this?" "Because in 8 hours I am going to walk out your door, and I will never come back, and I owe you a debt I cannot repay in money. Money is the only thing my family is not short of, and money is the only thing I cannot give you because the moment a deposit hits your account from any entity connected to me, my uncle will trace it and he will appear at this door and he will not knock. So I am going to give you the only gift I can give you, which is a warning. Quit your job at Kessler and Bain. Today. Before Friday. They were paid by my uncle to translate that contract. You found his clause. He knows your name now too." The coffee cup slipped from Imani's hand. It didn't break. It just rolled across the linoleum and stopped at the foot of the radiator, which clanked like it owed somebody money. She thought about her bank account. $312.84. She thought about her plane ticket to Seoul, January 14th. She thought about her mother's hip, her brother's rent, her cousin's son, the manila folder, the 18 months of $50 paychecks, the lipstick she'd been wearing for 4 years. She thought about the fact that a man she had been bleeding for everyone else her whole life had finally arrived at her door, and he was a billionaire, and he was hunted, and he was telling her to run. "Junho," she said quietly, "I think you need to stop talking and start listening, because I have a counter-proposal." He looked at her. She looked at him. The radiator clanked. "You have a problem," she said. "You need to be alive on January 20th. That's 3 months and 18 days from now. You can't go home because home is where the assassins are. You can't stay in a hotel because hotels have cameras and credit cards. And you said yourself, your uncle has resources. You need to disappear into a life so unremarkable that the man hunting you would never think to look there." She paused. "I have a problem too. I have $312 in my checking account. I have a family who has fed on me for 10 years. I have a job that, according to you, is now actively dangerous. And I have a plane ticket to Seoul, Korea, dated January 14th, which I have been saving for since the spring of last year, and which I do not want to give up. Not for my mother, not for my brother, not for anybody." She took a breath. "You said you can't give me money. Fine. I don't want money. Money has a way of evaporating when you give it to a Whitfield. I want something I can't lose. I want a way out. So here is what I am proposing. We get married. On paper, a business contract. As your wife, I receive a marital property allotment under Korean civil law. As your wife, I am untouchable to your uncle without him violating succession rules your father put in place. As your wife, I have a visa, an apartment in Seoul, and a name no one can take from me. As your husband, you have a place to disappear. Right here in this basement apartment, because no one in any organization on earth is going to look for the heir of the Daehan Group in a 1-bedroom on East Madison Street with a black woman from Baltimore. We hide you. I quit Kessler. We leave for Seoul together on January 14th. You inherit on the 20th. And then we annul the marriage. You go your way. I keep the apartment and a fair settlement, and we never see each other again." Junho was silent for a long time. "You have thought about this for 45 minutes, he said finally. "I have thought about this my entire life. I just didn't know what shape it would take." "You understand what you are walking into. My uncle has killed 9 people in his life that I personally know about. If he discovers our arrangement, he will not see a contract. He will see a woman who married into his inheritance. You will become a target. Not in a metaphor, in a parking garage. Like me." "I understand." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because I have spent 28 years being eaten alive by people who said they loved me, and I am not afraid of a man who at least has the honesty to say he wants me dead. At least his bullet would be honest." Junho exhaled slowly. He reached into the inside pocket of the bloody overcoat folded on her armchair and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He removed a black card. No logo, no number, just a single Korean character pressed into the matte surface. "This card is mine. There are 3 others like it in the world. My father has one. My personal attorney has one. The 4th has been in this wallet for 10 years, and I have never given it away. If you take it, the bargain begins. There is no renegotiation. There is no walking back. Walk into the bedroom and think for 10 minutes. Then come back and either take it or hand me my coat." She didn't go to the bedroom. She didn't need 10 minutes. She had spent her entire adult life rehearsing this moment without knowing it. She picked up the card. It was warm from his coat. "On one condition," she said. "If we do this, you have to promise me one thing. Whatever happens between January 14th and January 20th in Seoul, in front of your father, in front of his entire empire, I do not perform. I do not shrink. I do not pretend I am less than I am to make a single person in your life comfortable. I walk in as Imani Whitfield, or I do not walk in at all." For the first time in 12 hours, Junho Seo smiled. "Mrs. Seo, he said quietly. "I would not have offered the card if I wanted anything less." She walked into Kessler and Bain at 8:47 a.m. on Wednesday in a navy blue suit she'd bought at a Macy's clearance for $42 in 2022. She did not go to her cubicle. She walked past Janet at the front desk, past the coffee station where Bryce from litigation always made comments about her hair, past her own chair where the framed photograph of her mother and grandmother still sat next to a dying succulent, and she went directly into Kessler's corner office without knocking. Mr. Albert Kessler, 63, 3 divorces, looked up from a deposition. "Imani, did we have a meeting?" "We do now." She closed the door. "You're going to accept my resignation. Effective immediately, you are going to pay me 3 months severance, not the 2 weeks in my contract, 3 months, and you are going to write me a recommendation letter on firm letterhead that I will draft and you will sign. And then I am going to walk out of here, and you are going to forget I ever flagged a clause on page 47 of the Dehan Group pharmaceutical contract." He laughed. He actually laughed. "Imani, sweetheart." "Mr. Kessler." She set a single sheet of paper on his desk. "This is a copy of the original markup, in my handwriting, time-stamped. Photographed before you took credit for it in front of a client representing a Seoul-based holding entity that has this week become the subject of a federal Treasury Department alert that I am told will be public by Friday. I do not need to tell you what happens to a senior partner who knowingly accepted credit for protecting a client, now under that kind of scrutiny. I am offering you a quiet exit, for both of us." He stopped laughing. She walked out of his office at 9:14 a.m. with a check for $18,500 and a recommendation letter that called her the most exceptional translator this firm has employed in 3 decades. The succulent stayed on the desk. She didn't need it anymore. By noon, Imani was back at her apartment with 2 suitcases of Junho's quietly delivered supplies, 3 burner phones, and a marriage license application, filled out in both their names. They were married at 4 p.m. on Friday at the Baltimore courthouse by a judge who didn't ask questions, with Yolanda from high school as their only witness, and a notarized prenup so detailed it took up 16 pages. Then came the hard part. She called her mother on Saturday morning. "Mama, I'm leaving for Korea in 3 weeks. I will not be sending money for at least 6 months. I love you and I will check on you, but I cannot keep doing this. I am 28 years old and I am dying. Imani Renee Whitfield, you do not get to abandon this family because you... Mama, I'm not asking. I'm telling. I love you." She hung up. The phone rang back 19 times in the next 4 hours. She did not answer. Then Darnell. Then Trina. Then Aunt Vernita, who called her selfish, ungrateful. "Marquise was right about you. And your grandmother is rolling in her grave." Imani let every call go to voicemail. She sat on the floor of her bedroom and shook for 40 minutes, Ugly cried into a pillow Junho silently brought her without saying a word, and then she got up, washed her face, and started learning everything she could about the Daehan Group succession structure, because she was a translator, and translators read the contract before they signed it. Quick interruption: if anyone listening has ever had to set a boundary with the people who raised you and felt that specific kind of grief that doesn't have a name, drop a heart in the comments. Just so I know I'm not talking to an empty room. Just so the next woman scrolling knows she's not alone. Now. Back to Imani. By the second week of October, she'd memorized the names and faces of every person on the Daehan board. By Halloween, she could draw the floor plan of the SEO family compound in Hanam-dong from memory. By Thanksgiving, she could field strip the small handgun Junho gave her in 17 seconds. She did not feel safe, but for the first time in her life, she felt prepared. And on January 14th, at 11:35 a.m., Imani Whitfield boarded Korean Air Flight 094 from Dulles to Incheon in Seat 2A of business class, with a Korean Mafia heir in Seat 2B, a marriage certificate in her purse, and $312 in her old checking account that she had not added a single dollar to in 98 days. She did not look back. The succession meeting was held on January 20th at 3 p.m. in the formal dining room of the SEO family estate, a 12,000 square foot residence on a hillside in Hanam-dong with a view of Namsan Tower and walls lined with 300 years of Joseon-era calligraphy. 22 people were in the room. Junho's father, Taemin, sat at the head of the table in a wheelchair, oxygen tube in his nose, eyes still sharp as obsidian. His brother Tae-jun, the uncle, sat at his right, smiling. Junho sat at his father's left. Imani sat next to Junho. She was the only woman in the room. She was the only black person in Hanam-dong. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit she had picked out herself in Cheongdam-dong, with a credit line her husband's attorneys had set up under her own name, and she had not once in the previous 6 days lowered her eyes when a single member of this family had stared at her like she was a stain. Tae-jun opened the meeting in Korean. He spoke about tradition, about bloodline, about the unsuitability of his nephew, who had been shot in a Baltimore parking garage like a common criminal and had returned with an American distraction. He gestured at Imani without looking at her. That calls into question his judgment, his focus, and his fitness. He requested, formally, that succession pass to him. Taemin, the dying patriarch, turned his head slowly toward Imani. "Mrs. Seo," he said in Korean, his voice a rasp, "my brother has spoken about you as though you are not present. Would you like to respond?" Every person in the room turned to her. This was the moment she had rehearsed for 98 days. She stood. She did not raise her voice. "Seo Tae-jun si," she said in Korean, so precise, so unaccented, that 2 of the older men in the room flinched. "My husband was shot in a parking garage in Baltimore on September 12th at 11:42 p.m. by 2 men driving a black SUV with rental plates that were leased 8 days earlier in Busan to a shell company called Jinsong Holdings, whose registered owner is Han Sang-woo, your driver of 19 years. The bullet entered his left flank and exited cleanly because I sutured it with fishing line on my kitchen floor. He survived because I let him in. He inherits today because I married him." She paused. "You speak of bloodline. I will speak of evidence. In my husband's possession, currently held in escrow with 3 independent legal entities in Seoul, Geneva, and New York, are 47 documents and 22 encrypted recordings that establish a financial trail between Jinsung Holdings, your personal accounts at KB Kookmin, and the men who pulled the trigger. They will be released to the Korean Prosecutor's Office, the Seoul Metropolitan Police, and 3 international financial regulators if my husband does not, by 6 p.m. today, walk out of this room as the sole successor to the Daehan Group. They will also be released if anything happens to him, to me, to my mother in Baltimore, to anyone we love, between now and the natural end of our lives." She let it sit. "You called me a distraction. I am not a distraction, sir. I am the insurance policy." The silence in that dining room stretched for 14 full seconds. Then Taemin, the dying patriarch, did something his sons had not seen him do in 11 years. He laughed. It was a thin, papery sound, but it was real. "My son," he said in Korean, turning to Junho, "you did not bring home a distraction. You brought home a strategist." He turned to his brother. "Tae-jun, you will sign the abdication. You will resign from every Daehan board by sundown. You will leave this house tonight. If you contest, the documents go public and you spend the rest of your life in Seoul Detention Center. Do you understand?" Tae-jun's hands were shaking. He signed. Imani Whitfield. Seo sat back down. Her husband, under the table, took her hand. She did not let go. 3 days later, her mother called. Imani was standing in the kitchen of the apartment Junho had given her in Cheongdam-dong, not a marital home, a separate residence, in her name only, written into the prenup as non-returnable property. It was the first thing she had ever owned that no one could take from her. It was 7 a.m. in Seoul, 5 p.m. in Baltimore, and she answered on the 3rd ring. "Imani?" Her mother's voice was the voice she had not heard in 3 months. "Hi, Mama." "Baby?" A pause. "I saw you on the internet. You're on the Korean news. They said you married into one of the richest families in Asia." I did. Imani. Her mother started crying, and Imani's whole body braced for it like a woman bracing for a wave. Imani, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud. You done made it, baby. You done made it for all of us. There it was. For all of us. 3 months ago, that sentence would have unmade her. 3 months ago, she would have already been opening the banking app, calculating, transferring, apologizing for taking 98 days to call. She closed her eyes. Mama, I love you. I want you to listen to me very carefully because I am only going to say this once, and I am saying it because I love you and not because I do not. Baby, I am not going to send you money. I am going to set up a trust in your name that will pay your medical bills, your mortgage, your prescriptions, and a monthly stipend of $2,400 that you can spend on yourself and only yourself. It will not pay Darnell's rent. It will not pay Trina's bills. It will not pay Aunt Vernita's car note. It will not pay for a single person in this family except you. And if you transfer $1 out of it to anybody else, the trust dissolves and you get nothing. Those are the terms. They are not negotiable. I love you, and I am not your retirement plan. I am your daughter. Her mother was silent for a long, long time. Imani, she said finally, who taught you to talk like that? I did, Mama. I taught myself, while y'all were eating. The silence stretched. Are you happy, baby? It was the first time in 28 years her mother had asked her that question. Imani looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the Seoul skyline, at the Han River winding silver through the early morning, at the city she had whispered along to in Korean dramas when she was 15 years old and didn't yet know what she was preparing for. I'm becoming, Mama. That's better than happy. Her mother said, very quietly, Okay, baby, okay. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was the smallest, most fragile beginning of something that might one day, if both of them survived their own histories, become a relationship between two grown women instead of a transaction between a daughter and a debt. It was enough. Imani hung up the phone. She did not cry. She made herself a cup of coffee, and she watched the sun come up over Namsan, and she let herself, for the first time in her adult life, feel the weight of nothing on her shoulders except her own breath. By March, Imani was no longer Mrs. Seo in any practical sense. The marriage was still legally intact. The prenup specified a minimum 18-month duration before dissolution. For tax and inheritance purposes, both of them understood, but they lived in separate residences, and the public arrangement was a quiet, dignified, and rarely discussed matter of Seoul's elite gossip circuit. What Imani did with her time was something else entirely. She founded a translation and legal consulting firm called Whitfield Linguistics, headquartered in a single 380-square-foot office in Gangnam. She leased with her own money, $18,500 severance from Kessler, plus a $40,000 personal loan she'd taken out in her own name against her own credit, refusing the marital line her husband's attorneys had offered her. By the end of February, she had 2 clients. By the end of March, 11. By April, she had hired her first employee, a Korean-American paralegal named Soo-jin from Queens, who had been quietly underpaid at a competing firm, and was billing $340 an hour for high-stakes contract work that Korean conglomerates increasingly wanted, reviewed by a translator who had once flagged an $11 million trap on page 47. Her name traveled. Quietly, the way real reputations do. In May, she was invited to speak at a panel at Seoul National University on cross-cultural legal translation. She wore a suit she had bought herself, on her own card, for her own reasons. She spoke for 45 minutes in Korean and 20 in English, and a recording of the panel was uploaded to YouTube, where, as of the morning of June 3rd, it had 1.2 million views. Her mother watched it. Her mother sent her a text that simply said, "I see you, baby." Imani saved the screenshot. By July, Whitfield Linguistics had revenue of $186,000 in its first 6 months. By August, she had 9 employees and a real office in a glass tower in Yeoksamdong. She paid herself a salary of $9,500 a month, modest by Seoul executive standards, and she invested every spare one she could into her business, into a Roth IRA she had opened for herself with the help of an American expat accountant who refused to gossip, and into a single line item in her personal budget she had labeled, with no apology, mine. For the first time in her life, Imani Whitfield's bank account was not a hallway people walked through. It was a room with a door, and the door had a lock, and she was the only one with the key. She and Junho had dinner once a week. It was the only standing item on both their calendars. It had started as a logistical necessity. Prenup language required quarterly meetings to review marital filings, and had quietly, without either of them naming it, become something else. They ate at a small Italian place in Itaewon, where the owner did not know who Junho was, and did not care, and they talked about everything and nothing. About her mother, about his father, who had died peacefully in March, and whose funeral she had attended in a black hanbok that had made the entire Seo family pause when she walked in. About the book she was reading, about the company he was restructuring, about her brother Darnell, who had, after 6 months of silence, called her in May to apologize, genuinely, finally, and who was now working a steady job at a Baltimore public works depot and paying his own rent for the first time in 9 years. On a Tuesday in late September, Junho looked at her over a glass of red wine and said, in Korean, "Imani, the 18 months are up in 3 weeks. I know. I have signed the dissolution papers. They are with my attorney. They will be filed the moment you tell him to file them." I know. He looked at her for a long time. "I am not asking you to stay married to me," he said finally. "I am asking if I can take you to dinner. As a man asking a woman, with nothing on the table except whether you want to see me again next week." Imani set down her wine glass. She thought about the gun against her temple. She thought about her grandmother's quilt. She thought about the woman she had been on September 12th, with $312 in her checking account, and the woman she was now, with a business and a name and a door that locked. "Junho," she said, "sign the dissolution. File it. I want to date you as Imani Whitfield, not Mrs. Seo. I want you to court me from zero. No money, no favors, no empire, just dinner, and we see what we are when neither of us needs the other to survive." He smiled. He filed the papers the next morning. Their first real date as two unmarried people was a walk along the Cheonggyecheon stream on a Saturday in October. He brought her flowers. She brought herself. There is a lie that has been sold to women, particularly to black women, particularly to the daughters and granddaughters of women who survived things their daughters can barely imagine, that love is a verb that bends only one way, that to be a good woman is to give until your own well runs dry, and to call the dryness holiness. Imani Whitfield believed that lie for 28 years. It cost her her 20s. It cost her her relationships. It cost her, very nearly, her life on a marble floor in a Seoul penthouse with a gun against her temple, where she chose, in the final accounting, to hold the hand of a man who had asked her to be his equal instead of taking the offer of a man who would have made her his widow. She did not get a fairy tale. She got something better. She got a business in her own name. She got a relationship with her mother built on truth instead of transaction. She got a brother who learned to stand on his own feet because she finally stopped carrying him on hers. She got a marriage that ended and a love that began on the only foundation that ever lasts, two whole people choosing each other from a place of plenty, not panic. She got herself back. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in any frame of it, do 3 things for me before you click away. Comment the words, "I am the room with the door," if you are ready to start locking yours. Share this with one woman in your life who is bleeding for everyone but herself. And subscribe, because next week I am telling you the story of a nurse from Atlanta who walked into a Tokyo hospital and walked out with the keys to an entire pharmaceutical empire. She didn't get a fairy tale ending. She got something better. She got herself back. And so can you.